from some other country music folks. So inside here, when you come in, you will see that this is Hank Snow. He was the first inductee to the Nova Scotia Country Music Hall of Fame, and this was his plaque. And Hank Snow was the first, and Wilf Carter was the second. And on the other side of this is Wilf Carter. But I'll show you some things here. We have a tribute. If you come over here and look, we have a tribute for Hank Snow every year on the third weekend of August. And the first one was in Somerville Beach in 1991. We outgrew that the first year we were there. There were so many people. We had to go to Caledonia. We outgrew that, and we had to go to Bridgewater. And then now we've come to Liverpool. But this is a compilation. A lady did this for us. These are all of the shirts. We make t-shirts every year at the Hit Tribute. And she took all those shirts and she made it into a beautiful quilt. So we have it behind glass here because we want to preserve it. But this lovely lady did it. And if you look up there, it says the 25th anniversary, the Hank Snow Tribute t-shirt quilt. And it was donated by the family in memory of Lottie Levy. And she knew Hank Snow and her daughter, Jeanette McAloney, who was a long-time fan and regularly attended the Hank Snow Tribute. So this is what this is in aid of. This lady made it in honor of those folks. So that was pretty nice. We have some things here as well. We have something from Aaron Frechette. Of course, Lucille Starr. You will see Lucille Starr was, of course, one of the Canadian sweethearts, along with her husband. And Hank Snow helped her in her career. And she gave us this beautiful jacket. And you'll see she has it on in one of her photos. And it's always lovely to be able to say that we have Lucille Starrs. This is from Carolyn Dawn Johnson, and a lot of you will know her. And she brought us her pants and shirt that she was using when she was over at the Astor Theatre, as did Aaron Frechette when he was over at the Astor Theatre. This particular guitar, we can't authenticate that it was Hank's. We don't know, but somebody said it was Hank's. We put it here because someone donated it. We're not sure about that. But here we have the Rainbow Ranch Boys brought us their part of their outfits. Now, I want to tell you something. I told you about the tribute that we have every year. Well, for years and years, these folks, the Rainbow Ranch Boys, came here and played behind all the people who were at the tribute. They would come, I know, can you imagine if we were from Ecum and you're playing at the tribute and behind you are Hank Snow's Rainbow Ranch Boys. It was quite an honor for us to have them come every year. They're all dead now except for one, and that is the guy in the middle there. His name is Roger Carroll, and Roger is the tall guy in the back. And I'll tell you a story about Roger Carroll. It's pretty interesting. What happened was they were playing at the Opry on the Friday night. On Wednesday, Hank's bass player quit and went with Lefty Frizzell. And so Hank said to, if you'll see there, the guy with the steel guitar is Caton Roberts, and he was a wonderful man. He came here and always played behind everybody at the tribute. It was a wonderful man. And he said to Caton, we need a bass player for Friday night at the Opry. Now you realize the Opry, Hank is a big star now. And so Caton says, you know what, my son plays in a band here in Nashville, and they have a really good bass player. Hank said, well, ask him to come and try out tomorrow night. So that's what he did. Well, anyway, Roger told me the story. He comes here to visit, and he was really funny. He said, 20 years in, he said, what happened was, I said, Mr. Snow, am I a member of your band yet? He said, I came to try out 20 years ago, and Hank Snow looked at him and said, keep trying, you're doing really good. Yeah. But can you imagine a young teenager playing at the Opry behind a big star like Hank Snow? He said it was such a thrill. He couldn't believe it. He said, I couldn't believe I was on the Opry stage playing. You know, he said, I've been there many times looking at people. So that was pretty wonderful to have that. So, yeah, so that's why we have these here, because they brought these when they came here to perform. This is an outfit of Hank's that we got at auction. Now, I'll just tell you that these are some of Hank's. You can see from here, these are some. I love this one. And if you'll notice, here it is, up here, there. And I always loved that one, and I really wanted that one. He's in this right here, but we didn't get it. But we did get this one. This one is here, right here. So all of these that you see here, everything that you see here, we got at auction. We bought at auction. This one in particular is very, very heavy. It's very ornate. Nudie, and that's a guy that did all things for Porter Wagner and all those guys. He is the guy who did these. His company did all of this. It's very intricate. All of the really beautiful crystals and things on them are quite unique. Now, I don't know if you have seen the movie Elvis. No? Well, for 20-some years, I've been telling everybody the story. And now somebody has put it in film. I could have made a lot of money if I had done that. But anyway, I read it in Hank's book, and Hank doesn't have anything bad to say about anybody in his book, except for one person, and that is Tom Parker. And what happened was Tom Parker and Hank were in I would say it would be a promotion company for musicians. And I'll tell you the other part of the story is that Elvis and Jimmy Rogers Snow, Hank's son, were best friends. And Jimmy Rogers was here, and Jimmy Snow was here, and he said to me, he said, I'll tell you, we were hellions. He said, imagine my father gave me a convertible Cadillac to drive around Nashville. And Elvis and I were friends, and we drove, he said we were hellions. He said, what happened was I told my father, I said, you know, Elvis has got a little record here. And his father said, you know what, we should get him to perform. And he said, no, his parents won't let him. So Hank and Tom were talking about it. Hank said, well, look, I'm a down-home guy. Let me go and talk to the parents, which he did. And they said yes. So he came back, he said to Tom Parker, he said, listen, Tom, he said, I spoke with the Presleys. They said yes. They said yes. They would let him. So he said, can you get the contract signed? Tom said, yes, I will. 2 days later, Hank said, I read this in his book, said, did you get a chance to go and speak to the Presleys? He said, well, yes, I did, Hank. Only one thing. I had them sign the contract in my name, not in ours. That's how Tom Parker got Elvis. Wasn't very nice. And as I say, that's the only person that Hank had something not nice to say about, and never ever did like him. It's interesting because Hank still helped Elvis. He took him to the Opry, he did stuff with him, and of course that's because he was his son's best friend. Well, it's interesting about that too, and Jimmy mentioned this. He said, you know, years later, Jimmy got saved, and he became a preacher. And of course, at that time, Elvis was big. And of course, also, everybody was against Elvis and the way he, you know, down south way he was, you know, way he danced on stage and stuff. And so did Jimmy. So Jimmy preached against his best friend years later. So it was very interesting. And Jimmy said, you know, times were different then, that's for sure. Yeah. But anyway, it was always interesting to see that story. Now, I don't know if you can think about it, but Hank Snow came from this, and he was an abused child. He started an international foundation for abused and neglected children. He left them millions of dollars when he died. And it's because he was an abused child. Now, when they decided that they were going to make a museum, they called him up. They said, Hank, we were thinking of making a museum. You know, you've done so much and we'd love to honor you. He said, oh, that's really wonderful. Thank you very much. They said, and we think we might be able to get the train station. And right away, he said, in Liverpool? Really, it showed up, and they said, yes. He said, it was my safe place when I was a child. So imagine we have this place that was his safe place. That's because his parents were divorced. Things were different in those days. You know, the wife had to go out to work. The children, 2 of the other children went into service, the older girls. They were like 10 and 11. They still were put out to look at someone's house to work. The youngest one went into foster care. Hank was taken by his father to his grandparents, and he stayed there. His grandmother was very, very nasty to him. She was not a nice lady, and she beat him terribly. She wouldn't have him even say his mother's name, and he loved his mother. So Hank, you'll see the train tracks outside the window there, and they come from Brooklyn, those train tracks. And that's where Hank used to come when he was a child. And he would come down those train tracks there, out there, and he would come down, was actually she was working in Liverpool. She was working in the home of a pharmacist. She was actually their housekeeper. So he used to walk down these tracks. He would come up to Liverpool. His mother didn't get off till 9 o'clock at night. He would lay in the grass outside of his mother's place, and he would then proceed to go home. And he was afraid to go home because he knew, and I'll show you this lady here, over here. If you look over here, this particular lady was his grandmother. And that's his father's mother. And she was very nasty. She beat him quite severely several times over the years that he was there. And the thing was, she wouldn't let him say his mother's name, and he loved his mother. So as I say, he would come up the train tracks, he would go up and he would wait for his mother to get off. And as I say, she was working as a housekeeper for a pharmacist in Liverpool. And when she got off, they would visit. So it would be like 9:30 at night when she got off. Then when he started to go home, he knew he was going to get beat. And he said what he would do was, he would come in here to the train station, and there was a bench outside, and he would lay on the bench, and he would not get beat. He would lay there because he knew he'd get a beating when he went home. So anytime he needed a safe place, he would come in here. So it became his safe haven. Yeah. So it's such a wonderful idea that we were able to have this train station to be his, actually, to be the museum for Hank Snow, because it was a safe haven. Now, as I said, he started that international foundation. After Hank died, well, it would be in the year 2000, I was here actually, and his wife came in. His wife's name was Min, and she brought us all of this stuff. The things that you see here, she brought us all of this. And you will see the beautiful handwriting that Hank Snow had. That is a guy who had less than grade 5 education. And I say that because he went out on a trawler to the Grand Banks. He said it was absolutely horrible. He said the place was horrible. He said he had on these wetsuits, and he said the legs, he had to roll them up about 8 times. The arms, the same thing. They were still too big for him. He was a little guy. But the reason he went was because, I'll tell you, he wasn't only beaten by his grandmother, but after his mother remarried, she had him come to live with them, and his stepfather beat him. And he's a little guy. Now, I know that people say that he had grade 5 education, but I'm sure that he probably didn't, because trawlers wouldn't go out in the summer. They went out in the winter, and that's when he went out to and he said he went to the Grand Banks, and it would be horrible. He said it was a terrible trip. But anyhow, he did do that, and they didn't get paid. They were deck boys, and what they did was, they would be able to, when they got up to close to land, they could fish. Then they would go on the shore and they would sell their fish, and that's how he bought his guitar. He sold his fish on land. He said it was really, really horrible thing to have to do. Now, Min, his wife, brought us these things. We did buy this at an auction. But I'm going to tell you to have a look at this beautiful painting. He actually painted that. He was an artist. And we couldn't believe it when we saw it. So when she went home, she took pictures of those other, actually they were on her wall, and she took those for us. And we were so excited because, beautiful. Can you imagine that he was that talented? This is a guy, as I say, didn't have much of an education, but the very early revenue that he got from his singing down in Nashville, he bought this land here, and you'll see that this is his house. And he never moved from there. He could have. He had millions of dollars. He could have been in a much bigger place. But he was in Madison, Tennessee, and that's some of the pictures of the inside of his house. And he actually put in a pool outside and that sort of thing. But he had the ranch because, of course, he had Shawnee. And Shawnee, his horse, was at the Rainbow Ranch, and lived there until he was 31 or 32, I think, before he died. And he had lots of dogs and cats, and he buried them all in his land because he had farmland in behind. And that is still there in Madison, Tennessee. And Hank's great-nephew bought it from the estate. And so he's made it into an Airbnb. So it is, you can go there and stay, and he's done a really great job on it, so it's always nice. And I don't know if you know or not, but these folks, when he was on tour, Irving Oil or Mr. Irving. Mr. Irving, the original, loved Hank Snow. Now, if you look over here, and I'll show you if you can come over here with me, they have some of the Irving Oil sponsors. You can see the Irving Oil Country Days, and he sponsored Hank Snow, he sponsored Carol Baker. He gave Hank that beautiful shirt with Irving on it. Also, he gave Hank Snow the very first Irving Oil credit card, and it had Hank Snow on it. So, you know, if you see what an impact Hank Snow had on people, and Mr. Irving loved him and loved his music, so that was really wonderful. So, I don't know if I told you or not, but if you come over here, you will see over here that we have a gown from St. Mary's University. Hank Snow was honored by St. Mary's University. He was given a Doctor of Letters. He was very proud of that. This is a guy who didn't even have grade 5 education, but he was absolutely wonderfully talented. Now, of course, he didn't always speak like we hear him on Tales of the Yukon, where his diction is completely perfect. He was, if you look over here, he was with CHNS right here, and that's from CHNS, and that's in Halifax. And he had a little 10-minute program at CHNS, and it was sponsored by a flour company. And that is where he had to wait before he went on the air. And there was a guy who did the, well, it would be the, I guess, news, weather, and sports. And Hank was listening to him one day, and he said, "That's how I want to speak." And he taught himself how to speak like that. His diction in any of his recitations is perfect. The songs that he wrote have got beautiful wording in them. And of course, that's because Hank Snow taught himself. You know, he was a self-taught man, and certainly we can hardly believe that he came from this area, you know, when you really think about it. So that's why it's really important to see how this man, just how much he did. Now, you're wondering about this dress here that we have here. Mm-hmm. Well, his wife, Min, was a very accomplished seamstress. She was from Halifax. She was an Alders from Fairview in Halifax. Her brothers actually, at some point in time, sang and played with Hank. They're a very family. She made this dress. She was really, really talented. And if you see in there, there's a picture of her in the newspaper with that dress on at Hank's 25th year with RCA Victor. That was in 1961. Isn't that amazing? And Chet Atkins is there, and A.H. Joseph and Steve Scholes, all people that everybody knows. Hank was well known in the industry. He was well loved in the industry. He was, of course, a very particular person. He expected everything to be done in a right way, and that's how we have all those wonderful records, because that's what he did. He made sure that they were done. He didn't mind practicing. He didn't mind any of that. But no one in his band was allowed to drink, because once he became famous, and I'm not saying that he was like that all the time, because one time we had some folks here from Pictou and Cape Breton, and they were there, and one guy said to me, "You know, Hank Snow was in jail, in Pictou County Jail, with my uncle." I said, "Oh yeah." He said, "Yeah." So I got the book out, because that book, the Hank Snow story, tells you everything. I get in, I look through, sure enough, there it is. I was drunk and disorderly in Pictou County Jail. I went, okay, so his uncle was real. Which is what we call the car room. This is Hank's 47 Cadillac, and it's wonderful to have it here. It was restored, as you can see. You can imagine that's him with the Cadillac right there. It's a 47 Cadillac. He had got a little letter from RCA in Montreal, and they asked him to come up and do some recording. So he went into a dealer in Moncton, New Brunswick, Cadillac dealer, and he's actually kind of talked him into letting him have this car on time. And I'll tell you, that's a real thing, because Hank had no money at all. But he needed something to carry his horse. He had his horse in just a wooden carrier that he had behind the car. And he knew he needed something pretty strong to be able to carry it all the way. His son was here, and his son's name is Jimmy Rogers. No, I know, it's Jimmy Rogers. He was Hank's idol. You know, Hank loved him. Anyway, he came down and he was telling me, he said that carrier that they had for the horse, at one end, he was supposed to have a place for his mother and father him when they were on the road. He said, now, if you look at this, and this was the carrier, he said, that little spot there would be exactly for Mom and Dad, the rest was the horse. So he said we were always bunched up in it. He said it was quite a trip, I can just imagine. But anyway, this 47, he gave it to somebody in his band, and it went down through the generations. And a guy in Petticoat, New Brunswick, saw it on auction apparently, picked it up, and it was in really bad shape. We bought it from him, and we had it restored, so that's pretty nice. So over here, we have the 74 Cadillac. And this 74 Cadillac, very interesting story about the 74 Cadillac, and I'll tell you why. He called us up, and he said, look, I have a 74 Cadillac that's in Cars of Stars. He said, would you guys like to have it? Because he said, you know, they asked me to take it out, and I would like for you guys to have it. Well, of course, we wanted it. Of course, there was no question. 2 of our guys flew down. One of them was a mechanic. Good thing, because 13 miles out of Nashville, the car broke down. Well, it had been 10 years in a, it had been 10 years in a warehouse type place that they have. And of course, all of the rubber that was inside disintegrated. So the guy fixed it and brings back, it's a great car. I'm telling you, it's beautiful. It has very few miles on it. And it's so comfortable. So I was always happy that we were able to get that car. So we have the 47 and the 74. So, you know, it's quite wonderful. Also, we have a wonderful mural on the wall that you'll see. And we had called up Hank and we said, listen, Hank, we're thinking of doing a mural for our wall. Who would you like on it? So he gave us all these names. And you'll notice that the people had names above them. Well, we have summer students and they didn't know who they were. So we put the names up there for them. And you'll see who they are. So come over and see, and I'll show you that this is actually a canvas. It's actually a painting. And a guy in Nashville, an artist in Nashville did it for us. And of course we've got Hank Snow's idols, Ray Price and Ernest Tubb, who actually were responsible for Hank Snow's success. Ray Price invited Hank to come down to Texas, and Ray Price invited him to the Opry. Now you say, how did he ever get to be friends with these guys? Well, they loved Jimmy Rogers, and they loved Jimmy Rogers' train songs. And so Hank became their pen pals, because he loved them. And so he wrote to these people, and of course they got to know him through the, you know, in those days, everybody was writing letters. And so they got to know him, and that's how he got to go to Texas. People in Texas loved him, way before he went to the Opry. They loved him in Texas. They played his records on the radio. People would go and see him when he was there, and that's so nice, and that was because of Ray Price. Then the Opry became about, he got there because of Ernest Tubb, and Ernest took him to the Opry. Now, it's interesting that when you see this, because I'll just tell you that after he got to the Opry and did some recordings, here are some of the 169 LPs. You'll see them here on the wall. There's some of them. And 169, and that's a lot of albums, prolific amount of albums for anybody to do. And he had 169. When, a few years ago when I first came here, I got a call from a guy in New York. He said, look, I have 81, or no, he didn't say 81. He said, I have some Hank Snow albums. Would you guys like them? He said, the thing is, I'm older, my children don't want them. I said, yes. UPS came to the door and brought me boxes of albums, pristine Hank Snow albums. And I think about 14 or 16 that we don't have. And so I was thinking I'd have to rearrange these, but I had a guy was visiting here from Illinois, and he said, when I was telling him about it, and I said, what a job that's going to be. And he said, lady, if I were you, he said, I'd put them up here, and I put donated by. And he said, that's what I would do with them. He said, I would not take those down. And I thought, what a great idea. So that's what I'm going to do. We're going to put the albums up here. So this is this room, and this is we also have in here the Nova Scotia Country Music Hall of Fame, which you will also see all over the museum. And those are folks from Nova Scotia who've been inducted, who've done a lot for country music in Nova Scotia, and obviously they're recognized for it. And you'll see them all around up above. They're up above in all of the rooms, so.
Can you tell us about that mural right there at the
Well,
top?
that is an interesting mural, and it's kind of a little compilation of Hank's life. And the ones on the side, you'll see that over by that mural, there are plaques there. And people would buy part of those plaques. They're people who donate to the Hank Snow, Friends of Hank Snow Society. And they would buy one of those plaques in memory of a relative or whatever. So we put them up there, and then when people come, they can go and look at them. And we'll soon be opening this up, of course, for people to walk through, so that will be fun.